Hello, everyone, and welcome to CRSB webinar. I'm Ann Wasco. I'm chair of the Canadian Roundtable for Sustainable Beef, and I'm also a producer in Southwest Saskatchewan. And we've just come through a beautiful long weekend here. This webinar here today, we're going to talk about the impacts of COVID-19 on the sustainability of the beef industry. And again, I just want to thank all of you for spending your time with us this morning. This is the first in a series of webinars the CRSB is hosting in order to continue engagement during this very difficult time for our industry. Today's webinar is going to focus, like I said, on the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic on the Canadian beef industry and on opportunities that may come out of it for the sustainability of the industry going forward. We'll hear from speakers representing a variety of perspectives, including beef producers, beef processors, food service sector, and the conservation community. Andrea, I'll get you to flip the slide, please. On the screen, you should have our agenda in front of you. We're going to endeavor to have everything completed in 1 hour. So here in Mountain Time, we're at 10 o'clock. I'll make some comments, and then we're going to have the presentations from our 4 presenters, who I'll introduce in a moment. We'll go on to a Q&A, and then we'll wrap up. Our presenters this morning, and I'll have more of an introduction in a second, but you can see them on your screen. We've got Bob Lowe, rancher and president, Canadian Cattlemen's Association. Russ Mallard, CEO, Atlantic Beef Products, Inc. Marcel Blais, president, Chopped Steakhouse and Bar, and Karla, Guyn, CEO, Ducks Unlimited Canada. So at this point, I think, Andrea, I'll hand it over to you. Andrea White is our communications, engagement, and marketing manager, and she's going to walk us through some logistics.
Great, thanks, Anne, and good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. You'll probably notice that you've been muted as you logged on, so we're going to keep that that way throughout the webinar. As Anne mentioned, we have 4 speakers today, and following some short presentations from those 4 speakers, we will open up to a Q&A session where we invite you to post some questions to any of our speakers. We are going to do this via the questions window at the bottom of your webinar control panel. So you can just go in there and type any question that you have and submit it, and then we'll be able to see those at the end, and then we'll we get to the Q&A session. I will read out those questions and direct it to which speaker we think appropriate, and we'll have the speakers kind of answer those questions. We will try to get to all of them. If there are any questions that we don't get to, we can always connect with you offline following the webinar. And I'll just note that the webinar is being recorded today, so if you want to refer back, or for anybody that was registered but not able to attend today, that will be made available in the coming days. So I think with that, I can hand it back to Anne, and she's just going to provide a brief overview about the work of the CRSB here.
Okay, super. Thanks, Andrea. Okay, super. We'll just flip to the next slide. Here we go. So just a little bit about the Canadian Roundtable for Sustainable Beef. I know some of you on the webinar today certainly know lots about us, but we've got some new people with us today, and I just wanted to talk a little bit about what we do at the Canadian Roundtable for Sustainable Beef. You can see our mission on the screen in front of you: to advance continuous improvement of Canadian beef industry sustainability through multi-stakeholder engagement, collaboration, communication, and science. We do have 3 pillars of work. You can see that triangle there with the 3 different areas. The first, our sustainability benchmarking through our National Beef Sustainability Assessment. This is a comprehensive overview of the sustainability of the Canadian beef industry from farm to fork, from environmental, social, and economic perspectives. A sustainability strategy goals were set for continuous improvement, and the first assessment was done back in 2016 and released then. We've done an interim report that was just released earlier this year, showing we've made great progress on a lot of our goals, but there's still work to do. And our next full assessment will occur in 2023. The second pillar of work is our Certified Sustainable Beef Framework. It's a voluntary certification program that recognizes sustainable practices in beef production and processing, measured against sustainability standards through a third-party audit. It supports retail food service companies in meeting sustainable sourcing commitments and to provide assurances for consumers delivered via marketing logos and claims. Currently, there are 3 companies using the logo. We have over 1,200 farms and ranches and 4 processing plants with certified standards. 4.9 million pounds of beef have been sold with the CRSB claim. Our third pillar is our sustainability projects pillar, and this is an area that allows us to show continuous improvement in sustainable beef production through ground projects that demonstrate, pilot, and promote the goals of the sustainability strategy. And it's facilitated through an annual survey. Currently, this year's is open until May 31st, so we're coming up close to that deadline. And again, looking for featuring projects on various online project inventory. So check out crsb.ca to find out more about that. On to our next slide, Andrea. The definition for sustainable beef was developed around the Global Roundtable for Sustainable Beef's definition as well. Working, of course, socially responsible, environmentally sound, and economically viable product that prioritizes planet, people, animals, and progress. The 5 principles, of course, being natural resources, people in the community, animal health and welfare, food, and efficiency and innovation. And of course, those 5 principles are all underpinned with economic viability to ensure that we incorporate social, environmental, and economic sustainability in all our work. Off to the next slide. We're pretty proud. This is a slide of a lot of the logos of our members, and we're so proud of our diverse membership. And this membership continues to grow. At each council meeting, we're approving and looking at new memberships that are wanting to get involved in our organization. Currently over 110 members and observers from all ends of our industry, beef producer organizations, processors, retail and food service companies, NGOs, food and agriculture business, academic institutions, scientists, researchers, and youth. Again, a pretty proud part of our multi-stakeholder organization. And one more slide from me, please, Andrea, and then we'll get into the meat and potatoes of our day today. What you see in front of us is our national strategy goals. There are 10 goals listed here, and this really sets our direction that we work on. Our 10 goals, this is where all our work needs to focus around. Our current goal setting process that we're in right now, we're looking to expand some of our current goals and make them more robust, specific, and measurable, and putting very specific timelines around getting them done. So as we've been able to move forward, we're filling in gaps and looking for where we continue to move forward. So, Andrea, I'll get you to flip to the reason we're all here today for today's webinar. And again, this will be the impacts of COVID-19 on the sustainability of the Canadian beef industry. And I'm going to introduce our 4 panelists. And what I'm going to propose I do is, folks, panelists, if you don't mind, I'm going to go through all 4 of your quick bios, your introductions, and then I'll hand over to each one of you as we go, so I don't have to jump in between and introduce separately. So first off, the first presenter we're going to hear from is Bob Lowe, beef producer from Southern Alberta, currently the president of the Canadian Cattlemen's Association. Bob is a tireless supporter of beef sustainability in Canada and is founding council member of the CRSB. After Bob, we're going to hear from Russ Mallard. He's the president of Atlantic Beef Products, Inc., a state-of-the-art beef processing plant located just outside Charlottetown, PEI. APBI has developed a number of key brands that support its island and maritime beef producers, participate in many community initiatives, and is a CRSB certified sustainable beef processing facility. Third, we'll hear from Marcel Blais, who is president of CHOP Steakhouse and Bar. CHOP has been a great supporter of the CRSB and sources 100% Canadian beef in its restaurants. In March this year, CHOP made a commitment to sourcing a portion of their beef for the CHOP burger and are the first full-service restaurant to use the CRSB certified logo on a restaurant menu. And fourth, but certainly not last or least, is Dr. Karla Guyn, one of Canada's leading conservationists. As Chief Executive Officer for Ducks Unlimited Canada, she leads more than 400 staff across the country to deliver on-the-ground habitat conservation, research, education, and public policy efforts. Her more than 20 years of experience have seen her travel across North America in pursuit of wetland and waterfowl conservation, developing strong partnerships with landowners, industry groups, and governments. Her passion for the outdoors was instilled at an early age, born from the time at her grandfather's ranch in southwestern Alberta. Today, Karla feels most at home amid the rolling grasslands and lush wetlands of the Canadian prairies. So with those introductions, I think first of all, I'm going to get Andrea, you're running the controls, hand over presentation mode to Bob Lowe.
Great. Bob has let me know he doesn't have any slides, so we will just hear what Bob has to say, and hopefully everybody can see him. Go ahead, Bob.
Okay, thanks, Andrea. Thanks, Anne. And I'm not technically proficient enough to supply slides, so you just have to look at the picture. Hello, everybody. I'm Bob Lowe, and I'm the current president of the Canadian Cattlemen's Association. We're here today to talk about COVID-19 and how we think it will affect the Canadian cattle industry. I tend to look for the silver lining which exists in every cloud if we hunt for it. Living through a pandemic is not something that anyone really wants on their resume, but if we have to do it, it behooves us to learn something from it and move forward stronger and better prepared for whatever is on the way. COVID-19 has provided us with some valuable lessons already, and no doubt more to follow as we analyze what happened. Crisis breeds innovation, and we have watched this come to life in the packing plants. Some are suggesting that smaller, more regional plants might be the answer, but I would counter with, if the packers had not been hit as hard as they were, would the incentive have been there to implement all the strategies that they did to protect themselves and their employees from future threats? Not to mention the efficiencies that come with size, which allows farmers a higher return on their product and customers to be able to take advantage of reasonably priced, nutritious food. To me, the most significant opportunity COVID has provided is people are suddenly very aware of food in the food chain. We have developed a very efficient and safe means of getting the cow to the hamburger and on to the customer. COVID has pointed out the weakest links, which we are now addressing. We have a very narrow window of opportunity when the general population is really aware of where their food comes from. People, including primary producers, have learned to take the food in grocery stores for granted. How many folks alive now have ever seen empty grocery store shelves? Not me. When I took over the reins of CCA, one of my goals was to raise the profile of food. I didn't want it to be because there wasn't any. I think we have had just enough shortages of a few items, beef being one, to make customers aware and maybe not take for granted the idea that food will always be there. We need to take this opportunity to really show the general population the value of the food chain as it pertains to them. We need to get people in the metropolitan areas to reconnect with agriculture. And we need to do this without using fear as a motivator. Farmers and ranchers need to be proud of what they're doing. All the employees along the chain need to be proud of the fact that they are producing food for everyone else. Without good, nutritious food, health will cease to be a concern. We need to get the halo effect around beef and indeed around all food. If we are successful in this, Canada will always be able to produce enough food for ourselves and those around the world who depend on us. We are one of 5 or 6 countries in the world that will have the ability to produce more food than we need. We have an obligation to the world to take advantage of this, but we won't be able to unless the 98% of the population not involved in food production is on board and proud of Canada's food production system. How do we do this might be a question worth asking. I believe that the answer is out there, and it is probably an amalgamation of a whole rafter of different ideas. More importantly is the when, and the when is now. People are concerned about a lot of what we previously took for granted, of which food is right at the top of the list. People are watching and waiting, I believe, for agriculture to assure them that our food supply is stable. It is up to all commodity groups, all the farmers and ranchers, all the processors, both primary and secondary, truckers, the inspectors, the unions, and everyone else involved in the food chain to step up to the plate and start talking about food. One thing that COVID has done has brought the ag industry together. At the moment, the Canadian Cattlemen's Association, the Canadian Pork Council, and others have bought into a Canadian Federation of Agriculture-led initiative on an advertising campaign promoting agriculture and the food chain, aimed at audiences in Vancouver and Toronto initially. Our public and stakeholder group is developing a campaign to complement the one led by CFA, but focused only on beef. There needs to be more of these initiatives by more players in the industry. Initiatives like this will help increase the awareness, but along with that, we need to increase the level of trust in the system. Trust is built by transparency. Research has shown that people don't really care about the details involving the raising of beef and food, but they do want to trust that their food is being raised with as little harmful effects on the environment and with as much attention to animal welfare as possible. We need to speak to customers with passion and to producers with the why. We in the cattle industry, from producer to retailer, have an obligation to lead the rest of the food chain in this endeavor. The CRSB is in a perfect position to take a leading role. We need all the ideas and we need them now. This won't wait. A friend of mine once said, "Don't let perfection get in the way of good." We need to move now. I believe that if we get this right, agriculture will get the recognition it deserves, because it won't be just 2% of us involved. Everyone will feel that they have a stake in Canada's food production. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thanks so much, Bob. And we're going to hold the questions. We'll go through our 4 presenters, so thank you very much. At this point, I'd like to have Andre hand the presentation mode over to Russ Mallard with Atlantic Beef Products. And Russ, take it away.
Thank you, Ann. I appreciate that. I'm going to just switch over to my screen. So, Andre, you may need to help me with that. Okay, great. Thank you. Can you see it now?
Yes, we can, Russ.
Great. Thank you very much. Well, appreciate it, Ann. Thank you, Andrea, for the invitation to talk to everybody today. We really do appreciate it. At Atlantic Beef, I'll just go through, this is our plant. It's not a huge plant. We have about 40,000 square feet, around 158 employees or so. And I'll just tell you a little bit about our company quickly, and then I'll get into some of the sustainability questions regarding COVID-19. So we have 158 people at our plant in Albany. We purchase beef and dairy cattle from producers in the region, as well as Quebec and Ontario, and we're always watching for opportunities to grow our herds here in the Maritimes, obviously. But if we can't get enough cattle here, we have to get them somewhere. Started by beef producers in 2004 to ensure there was a local plant. So basically in 2002, the only federally inspected beef plant in the region, which was located in Moncton, New Brunswick, was closed. So for 2 years, beef producers had a choice. You could ship them either into the States or into Ontario, into the Guelph area, or perhaps Toronto. So it wasn't a very good alternative for local beef producers. So they got together and formed a cooperative, and that cooperative eventually was able to secure funding to open up a beef plant, which is the same one that we operate in here today. We primarily serve beef and dairy producers in Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and PEI, as I mentioned already. We produce beef cuts and grinds for retail and food service. So we don't do anything else here, it's just beef, and we do a bit of portion control, a lot of grinds, and we do box beef here as well. So failure was not really an option here on the island, because the integrated nature of the potato and beef industry, we really are codependent, and the potato industry used to produce a lot of potato peelings and other byproducts. We have a French fry plant here in PEI. Used to have two. Cavendish Farms, who I also understand operate in Alberta, used to produce potato peels. About 9 or 10 years ago, they decided to produce biogas with those potato peels, so a cheap and plentiful source of feed for beef producers kind of went away. Having said that, potatoes need manure to grow, and potatoes need to be rotated through fields. Every third year is the ideal time to plant potatoes, and we need to have other crops, largely grains, alfalfa, other types of grasses and forages that the beef industry can use. So in return, manure produces the best kind of fertilizer going. So over the past few years, major efforts have been made to brand our beef to differentiate us from our competitors. So we're only small, and because we're only small, we do need to stick out. Our branding is important. We don't have the size or the scale to basically go head to head with the big guys. We're very proud of the fact that we're the second plant in Canada to become a CRSB processing plant. We're kind of waiting for industry in our area to catch up with VBP plus cow-calf operations. We have a number of VBP plus beef producers, but we need cow-calf to get the chain together. So we're hoping that we can figure out a way to work with the industry down here with CRSB to kind of come up with a series of graduated steps to get us along the path to getting CRSB available in the meat case and on the restaurant menus here in the region from cattle produced and grown here. We like to say we're kind of a small steak in a big meat counter. It's a competitive industry. When operating normally, JBS in Alberta produces about 4,500 a day in Brooks. Cargill produces about 4,000 a day in High River. Cargill and Guelph produces about 2,000 a day, and we're doing about 700 to 750 a week. So we're a little over 1% of the Canadian beef output now. I guess we're pretty proud of the fact that it wasn't all that long ago we were only 0.5%. So we're growing, and we're kind of maxing out the plant here these days. Just to talk about COVID-19 impacts and what we've been doing here. Obviously, things happened in a big hurry back in March. We could sort of see some things coming, but in March, there were so many unknowns. The situation was unfolding very quickly. I think we all had the fear factor was there for everybody, not knowing exactly how hard it was going to hit. The PEI government and our chief public health officer here moved quickly to close our borders. One of the advantages of living on the island is that when you can close a border, you can close a border. There aren't many ways to get across. There's a bridge. Just most recently, there's a ferry that opened up, and we have a ferry that goes from eastern PEI to the Magdalen Islands, which is part of Quebec. So we've got a pretty good way of managing our borders. We began very quickly here to implement steps for social distancing, temperature checks. A lot of information was made available to us very quickly. We have portable locker rooms. We have a portable tent for additional seating outside. Our boardroom is now a lunchroom on top of our lunchroom. So we have quite a bit of additional seating space. Temperature checks, as I mentioned earlier, we're doing twice a day to make sure that anybody who's working on the production floor feels that they're coming to work. The temperature is one way of testing. We also do a general health questionnaire as well every morning. As the meat industry does not compete on food safety, we all shared COVID-19 protocols, drastically improving the response time to implement. I got to hand it to Maple Leaf. They were particularly generous with sharing their protocols. They shared them through the Canadian Meat Council, and the Canadian Meat Council shared them with us. So Canadian Meat Council has been a great advocate and a resource for the industry, and we really appreciate the work that they've done. Other impacts. Well, community transmission led to major problems at some of the beef plants, but fortunately, we've not had community transmission here in PEI. We have 27 cases in PEI. They're all completely recovered now, and we've been very fortunate that we haven't had community transmission. So, that's made it. I think all the precautions in the world, will do some good, but won't necessarily help protect you from somebody who's asymptomatic coming to work who doesn't realize they're exposed because they picked it up in the community. So, we're very cognizant of that. As a company, we had unprecedented demand for beef and grinds, as you can probably appreciate, with some of the major packers, being at a commission or partially at a commission. We responded by increasing kills to the max to max out the plant and by adding some Saturdays where possible. We had more inquiries from buyers and retailers we've not previously sold, and we obviously don't have the scale to take on some of the larger customers that we don't deal with now. We do quite a bit of business with Sobeys and with Loblaws in our region, and a lot of smaller regional retailers, as well as some food service distributors. But our priority has been to look after our existing customers first, because obviously, we want to make sure they're taken care of. We've been asked to supply some of our customers' operations in other parts of Canada, and we've actually shipped ground beef products all the way across the country into Calgary, and from there it's gone across into Vancouver Island to Manitoba. We've been able to help them out, which I think has been something we're proud of. We've been able to help out and and kind of take care of them. And we're obviously going to continue to be very vigilant in our approach to mitigation, because we know that the threat is out there. We don't honestly believe that we're not going to have community transmission in PEI. We think we'll get it as the community starts to reopen, obviously, and as the provinces start to reopen. We're going to have the higher possibility of community transmission. We don't know when, we just know that it's going to happen. So education of our staff has been key. We believe our staff has much more knowledge than they used to have on exactly where and how to pick this up and how to avoid picking it up. So we've been very cautious about that. With respects to cattle prices over the past 9 weeks, Eastern Canadian market stayed in a steady range and have been up more recently. The last couple of weeks, we've seen some strength, and I believe there's quite a bit more strength in the market this week. Obviously, the retailers have been paying some pretty high prices for beef because the demand and supply situation on actual beef cuts have driven the cost out to the retailers. There have been some good demand for cattle, and some weeks have been hard to fill the harvest schedule with local cattle only, which is true. So although there are calls for more processing capacity in Eastern Canada recently, we have not seen cattle backing up here through the crisis, unlike Western Canada, because all our packers have pretty much remained open. Beef demand will likely suffer until consumer pricing comes down as a result of recovering inventory. So we are concerned about the high prices out to retailers and to food service as they reopen. We do believe this will cause them to look elsewhere for perhaps cheaper protein. These prices are starting to come down now in the US, and what the US does affect us here in Canada. And finally, the food service industry, unfortunately, will probably take a very long time to recover. We think a lot of our food service partners, and we're feeling very bad for them. And the restrictions that are going to be in their way to reopen to whatever the new normal is will likely be a very critical situation for them from a cash flow point of view, and we're concerned for food service. And if you're interested about us, these are some ways you can follow us on Instagram or Facebook or Twitter if you like. We'd love to have you following what we do. And that's what I have for you on my side. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Russ. And again, we'll have time for some questions for all of the presenters when we're done here. Our third presenter today, Marcel Blais from Chop Steakhouse and Bar. So again, Andrew, if you can hand the screen over to Marcel.
Thanks for the intro, Anne. Just as I'm waiting for Andrea here, I'd be remiss to mention that I hope everybody had a really long weekend, and also hope everyone is faring well and healthy during this health crisis. Andrea, have you given me control already?
I'm trying. It's still waiting.
No problem. No problem.
It was showing me your name twice, so maybe I'll just try it again.
There we go. So Andrea, can you see my screen?
Yep, I can.
Yes, so I can see it, Marcel. Yes.
Great. Thanks, ladies. So it was just over 2 months ago, about mid-March, that due to a government mandated closure in Ontario, I made the difficult decision to close all 14 of our restaurants across Canada and laying off over 1,000 team members. It was a day I never really thought we would see. Since that time, we quickly reevaluated because, of course, we had no business to manage. And within about 2 weeks, we reopened a select number of our locations to try seeing how we could provide an essential service to the communities we operate in by offering takeout and delivery. And that's been quite successful, and we're in the process of reopening just about all of our locations, save one, for takeout and delivery at this point. And of course, as you know, there's varying timeframes for each province to come back. But when we were faced with the challenge of reopening, amidst COVID-19 pandemic, we realized that we had to make some assumptions, and we had to focus on what some of our assumptions and beliefs were. And I just wanted to share with the group what some of those were for us. They certainly are going to likely not be 100% accurate, but they're the assumptions and beliefs that we've undertaken as we try to plan our way to come out of this. And as Bob said, find our own silver lining on this and come out stronger than we went into it. So our first assumption was that we're heading into a recession, despite the difficult time that we're in right now economically with the impacts of COVID-19. We're also going to emerge into a recession. That's our belief. So the challenging times are still ahead of us for quite a while. We believe that health and hygiene and safety is going to be paramount and at the top of mind for all consumers out there as we return. We already know that this was important to consumers and a growing trend, but we believe that it'll never really be the same, that there's going to be a heightened awareness in this area. We also believe, and you've heard other panelists talk about it today, that trust and transparency are going to be critically important. They've always been really important when you think about a brand. It's difficult not to evaluate how much you trust a brand when you think of brand, but that trust and transparency is gaining more and more importance, and obviously has some real direct implications for the work that we're doing with CRSB. And we also believe that, prior to, if you look back at history and you look at other pandemics or other major global events that resulted in a major economic downturn, it's our belief that you'll find a trend, and that trend is that whatever macro trends existed before that crisis, once you emerge out of that crisis, those trends actually don't go away. If anything, they speed up in terms of their intensity and the speed with which they develop. And we believe the same thing is going to hold true as we emerge from COVID-19. So some of those trends that are particularly relevant to us is that prior to going into COVID-19, takeout and delivery was a growing segment of our business. It's one that typically steakhouses have often not even participated in, but we had started moving some energy and resources towards focusing on this part of our business. And there's no question that we've redoubled our efforts there since the pandemic. And we don't believe that is a temporary thing. We believe that is a long-term way that people are going to access getting great Canadian steak from us, is to do so through takeout and delivery. So we plan on doubling down there. We also believe that there was a movement towards frictionless transactions. And what I mean by frictionless is just, it's not a pain in the butt. It's easy to purchase, to do transactions online, to do transactions with a restaurant in general. And so for us, one of the things we're looking at is touchless payment. So we anticipate reopening here in June at some of our locations with a new payment system that people can just pay from their phone. And we believe that those technologies, of course, were in existence prior to COVID-19, but we believe the adoption rate of those kinds of technologies is going through the roof and is going to see unprecedented growth. So we've certainly seen that in takeout and delivery. People who were never used to using a third-party application like Skip the Dishes or DoorDash or the like, we've found that the adoption rate of that kind of technology, and we believe it will translate to payment technologies, is growing. We've also seen, in the media, but we also see it in research that there is, not only before COVID-19 was there a growing sense of buying local, but particularly about buying Canadian now that we're emerging from COVID-19. There's a real sense of people wanting to support other Canadians, small business people. And so this focus on buying Canadian is absolutely going to accelerate. We believe it's an opportunity for us with respect to Canadian beef, but also we're well positioned to be part of that as a Canadian company. And then finally, healthy products and vegan products. We saw growth in this prior to COVID-19, and we anticipate this growing as well. We're actually speeding up our move towards adding vegan items to the menu. And I think it's important for the people on this call to recognize that it's, because I often get asked running a national steakhouse why we focus on having some vegan items. And the reality is it's important for us to be inclusive. And we recognize that when people come out and dine, they dine in groups. And I think that's more obvious now than ever. And it's important for us to have a balanced offering that speaks to the entire market. And it's really good news, though, because the Canadian beef obviously plays in this space, as it truly is a nutritious food offering for the market. So we think that's got a real home here as well on this particular point. Really briefly, as you heard Russ indicate, it's going to be very difficult for food service. We are anticipating an 18-month recovery timeframe to get back to just our pre-COVID profitability levels. That's an extremely long period of time in an industry that has got famously razor-thin margins, much like the cattle industry. Just as a brief glance here, you can see how difficult we see the road ahead of us in terms of our sales. We believe we're going to see just a small percentage of our sales, 50% at first, growing through that as you go through each time frame. And like I said, taking just about 18 months is our projection for full recovery. You know, I really wanted to, with this group, hone in on a piece that Bob talked about. And he was talking about the importance of transparency with respect to the food industry. And I couldn't agree more. This slide is some research conducted by our valued partners at Molson Coors. And it really indicates here, it supports what Bob's saying, is that of the top 4 things that people think will help make them feel safe is this notion around, you know, food inspection results and food safety and transparency about where their food's coming from. We knew before COVID that more people were asking questions about where their food came from and how it got to their plate ultimately. And as I said earlier, we believe that kind of macro trend is just going to accelerate. And I couldn't agree more with Bob that the CRSB, in our opinion, is at a pivotal moment in time where we can really leverage what's going on in the marketplace and take action immediately to really move our agenda forward and improve the understanding of the sustainability efforts that are already going on and that continue to take place with respect to the beef industry. And we were already proud in early March to launch the CRSB logo connected with one of our menu items, advertising sustainably sourced beef product with our burger. And now more than ever, we're as excited as can be to continue to shout that message. And we believe that there is a growing audience of people who are looking for that kind of messaging and looking to feel reassured by the kind of safety protocols and sustainability that's in place in our food supply chain. So really, as Bob said, I'm interested in looking at the silver lining, and we believe we can cement a really strong position for Canadian beef. We believe that we've got the best beef in the world, that it's raised by small families, and that we should really lean into this competitive advantage. That the start of the beef chain process starts with stewards of the Canadian landscape, and it shouts and speaks to that concept of supporting local. And you know, we'd be really excited about the CRSB really leaning into that piece when it comes to marketing. We believe that the sustainably raised CRSB designation is going to become growing importance to consumers. And like I said, I think the time is now. And finally, you know, Canadian beef has long been a staple of a healthy Canadian diet. And I know that there's some misinformation out there, but to us, we think it's important for us to continue to provide factual information about where Canadian beef belongs with respect to a healthy diet. And ultimately, for us, we don't see any shortage of opportunities when it comes to Canadian beef. We think the timing now in terms of taking advantage of these opportunities is better than it's ever been. And we really see the value in moving from a product that some, if not many, view as a commodity to a trusted brand. And that's exactly what the CRSB is doing, is a version of branding for Canadian beef. And we think that's really important work, and we're very proud to be part of that. Thank you very much, and I look forward to hearing your questions.
Great, thanks so much, Marcel.
You're welcome.
And we'll move on to our fourth speaker, Karla Guyn with Ducks Unlimited Canada. And I know, Karla, I understand Andrea is going to run your presentation, but I believe you have the mic now.
Okay, thanks, and good morning, everyone. And yes, I'm going to have Andrea change my slides because apparently bandwidth in rural Manitoba isn't quite good enough to allow me to do that myself. So good morning, and thank you, Anne and Andrea and everyone at the Canadian Roundtable for Sustainable Beef for inviting me to join you in today's conversation. You know, at Ducks Unlimited Canada, our lives are really intertwined with the coming and going of the seasons, and we know and welcome spring as a time of change. But this year, you know, the changes were nothing we really could have expected. COVID-19 has turned everyone's world upside down, leaving all of us searching to find a way forward. You know, the familiar mantra of us being in this together, we really do all have a role to play. And for Ducks Unlimited Canada, our task is to uphold the responsibility of caring for our country's natural spaces and to find solutions for the conservation challenges of today. And we couldn't do that without the beef industry. So Andrea, if I get you to move to the next slide. So some of the country's most important habitats are managed and conserved by farmers and ranchers. We count them among our most important environmental stewards. So as we witness the debilitating effects this pandemic is having on them, we're concerned. Simply put, the actions that impact cattle, grasslands, wetlands, and wildlife all go hand in hand. And without a successful beef industry, conservation in Canada will not continue at the rate or the scale at which it's so desperately needed. History has shown that the potential of an economic fallout within the beef industry is a risk we simply cannot afford to take. Next slide. Memories of the BSE crisis that shook the Canadian cattle industry in the early 2000s are powerful reminders why. For many, ranching no longer provided a sustainable and profitable means of preserving their land. And as a result, Canada lost nearly 27,000 ranching operations, and with that, nearly 5 million acres of grassland. This kind of widespread loss has a distinct and damaging effect. For millions of nesting ducks, their reality quickly went from this, next slide, here we've got a pintail nest in native grassland to this, next slide. This is a pintail nest now in crop stubble. So today, the ongoing conversion of grasslands and wetlands to cultivated areas continues putting us in a precarious position. We can go to the next slide. So the map I'm going to show you is of the prairie pothole region, both in the US and Canada. And all of the yellow areas on that map that you see there are cropland, and the green are intact grassland. Next slide, please. Oh, sorry. And the circle that you see here is actually just Prairie Canada. So you can see how much cropland is actually in Prairie Canada. So like grasslands, next slide please. Like grasslands, Canada's wetlands are also under tremendous pressure. And so what we're looking at here is a watershed in Manitoba called Broughton's Creek. And this is what it looked like in 1968 And all those little blue dots on there are wetlands. You can advance the slide, please. But by 2005, we've got a very different scene. All of the red lines on here are now drainage ditches, and the red cross-hatched areas mark the locations where wetlands once were. So in 37 years, there's been a 21% reduction in wetland area and nearly a 70% loss of wetland basins that have either been degraded or actually lost. So now imagine extrapolating that to that landscape across all of Prairie Canada. And I think we'd all agree that that's really not sustainable. So perhaps one of the greatest wake-up calls came this last year when a new study reported that North America had lost nearly 2.9 billion birds, and that's with a B, since 1970. Conservationists, including myself, were stunned by the results and quickly recognized the plight of our birds as an overlooked biodiversity crisis, at least in part by decades of habitat loss. Next slide, please. Now, within this staggering report, the story of grassland birds is especially grim, with some 720 million birds lost. Now, these numbers are hard to fathom, but they are very real warnings about the state of our natural world. Next slide. So, if we are to be successful in bringing back our birds and protecting our precious habitats, we need to find ways of making conservation work for working landscapes. And this means recognizing the individual financial realities farmers and ranchers face, and understanding that producers must be able to compete economically on the landscape in order to help conserve it. Looking back to the BSE crisis, we never expected how quickly hard economic times for beef producers would transcend into habitat loss. Today, we have a far better understanding of the consequences, and more importantly, we have a far better chance to avoid them. And that's why Ducks Unlimited Canada is proud to stand with other organizations to advocate on behalf of the beef industry. In fact, just last month, we reached out to the federal government in a letter that was signed by our friends at Nature Conservancy of Canada and Birds Canada. And together we expressed our growing concern about the impacts of COVID-19 on beef farmers and ranchers, and the very real threat this possesses to the country's grasslands, wetlands, and other ecosystems. So it's true that there's still much we don't know about what the future will hold post-COVID-19, but the decisions that we make today are going to have important implications for the beef industry and grassland conservation for years to come. So thanks very much for sharing your time today.
Thanks, Karla, for those great words. I think at this point in time, I can't see the questions from here, but I'm certainly hoping there's some coming along. So Andrea, I'm gonna hand the mic over to you to lead us through a Q&A session with our participants.
Great, thanks, Han, and hopefully you can hear me. My audio has been a little sketchy, but
Yes.
Just a couple of you. Okay, great. Marcel and Bob specifically had kind of talked about CRSB positioning itself as, you know, that group that can move this thing forward, and Marcel had a couple of ideas around that. I wonder if each of the speakers might just want to touch very quickly on sort of one key thing you think that the CRSB could either do or continue doing that would get this message out to the wider public. So maybe we'll start with Bob.
Thanks, Andrea. I think my reasoning for suggesting CRSB can lead this is because of the membership of CRSB. Everybody is involved in it, and everybody can send their own message, assuming that it says about the same thing, which it will. But just because of the membership of the CRSB, everybody's on the same track. It encompasses the whole beef value chain, and we've got the reputation and the science behind us in case anybody asks. Marcel?
Yeah, I would agree with Bob. So I'll take a little bit of a different line at the question. And I really like what Karla said, that each of us has a part to play. And look, I recognize that beef producers out there are suffering right now. And this is a difficult time. And I truly do know what it's like to be a small business owner and facing the prospect of potentially not existing in the near or middle future. And so you know, I recognize the challenge that's ahead of us. Having said that, history would show those organizations that are willing to take a leadership role, take some bold action, and invest where they think they can win, often end up by winning. And for me, I would suggest that, you know, one of the reasons we are struggling to get CRSB designation on all of our menu items is we just don't have enough producers signed up yet. And what a difficult conundrum. Go invest time and energy in a time when you have neither to give to emerge through this crisis. But those are the kinds of questions that are being thrust upon all of us as business people. And my ask out there would be, you know, to what Karla said, every one of us has an opportunity to do our part. And we, from our standpoint, this movement would certainly pick up steam and speed if we had a growing number of producers jump on board.
Great. We'll pass over to Russ to see if you have any additional comments.
Just a couple of comments that this is a journey that we're on, becoming sustainable, and that the fact is that the trip can be the best part of the journey sometimes. And although we all want to get to CRSB menus on everything and having it a pure cow-calf all the way to end user experience, we have to understand that you know, we're going to have to be flexible a little bit as we continue to add pieces to the one brick in the wall at a time. You know, as we get more, we have to keep our eye on the prize, and that is we want to be all CRSB from start to finish. But I think we need to be flexible enough to start to educate consumers that pieces of this are coming together, and that we don't necessarily have to wait to advertise that it's all done before we really start to push it out. That we need to say that we're working towards this journey of sustainability, and we may have 2 or 3 of the 4 or 5 blocks available to us now, but it's progress, and you know, it's progress, not perfection. We just have to keep our mind fixed, I think, on the fact that we have to make it possible for our successes that we have encountered to date are shared with the public, that we're working our way through it. So we don't have all our cow-calf producers on yet. It doesn't mean that we're not much better off for this experience than we were just a year or 2 ago. So how do we share those successes, I think, are important.
Great. And Karla, do you have any additional comments you'd like to add?
Nothing too much. I think we've touched on a lot of it, but you know, like Bob, I try to see where can we see an opportunity in this to try to make things better. And if nothing else, if we can help educate the Canadian public about the role the cattle industry has in you know, our landscapes and protecting grasslands and wetlands, then I think that's been a positive that's come out of this. So I think CRSB has a great platform to be able to do that, as especially with a broad coalition of different partners that are part of CRSB, really provides a really good format to work from.
Great. Okay, we've got a few specific questions here. So for Marcel, on your numbers in terms of post-COVID sales, how much more expensive are your plates or meals? Do you anticipate are going to increase in order for you to stay profitable? And will you have reduced capacity? So, and will that increase the cost in the long run? And you touched on this a bit, but maybe if you could expand on that.
Yeah, although all the provinces haven't released their requirements, it's a safe bet to assume that the vast majority, if not all provinces, are going to have us reopening in a phased-in approach, which involves 50% occupancy. So that basically means that we get about half the amount of capacity to maximize our sales. So the restaurant industry isn't built on that. We can't sustain that for any real long period of time. And so we'll be relying heavily on the government subsidies that continue to evolve and change. But it's a real challenge for us. In terms of your question about pricing, we don't think the market can bear an increase in price. And as I said, one of our assumptions and beliefs is that we're heading into a recession, and we believe it's a mistake to try to take price during a recession. So we have to find innovative and creative ways to reduce the costs, strip away the costs in our operation. They aren't just linked to the purchase of beef, but as a steakhouse, we believe there's real value in that product, and we don't want to compromise on it. And so if our costs go up on beef, we're going to have to find creative ways in other parts of our operation to cut costs, because we believe it's core to who we are. So we don't see taking big increases, if any, on beef. As a matter of fact, we actually plan on combating the recession with value bundles and finding creative ways to get people dining experiences with beef, both in our restaurants and at home with takeout and delivery.
Great, thanks. Okay, changing gears here. What specific policy actions would you see as necessary targeted at the primary producer to not see this loss of producers and conversion of grassland to crops? So maybe I'll start with Bob, and then we can pass it over to Karla.
I think my own thoughts about this are that we need the government to understand the importance of agriculture and the importance of the beef industry. We've got the science is all there, and the focus with I mentioned the Canadian Federation of Agriculture's initiative. Really, what that's designed to do is to change I won't say change or maybe reinforce government's attitude towards agriculture when the general population is more aware of agriculture. So that's kind of the focus of the CFA initiative, is to make the general population more aware, which in turn will put pressure on government to ensure that we keep a viable industry. Karla?
Yeah, I agree. I agree with Bob. I think, and that was one of the main motivating factors for us writing the letter to the federal government and advocating on behalf of the beef industry, was just trying to educate them a little bit about how important the beef industry is to some of their primary goals, whether it's climate mitigation or species at risk. They need the cattle industry there, whether they know it or not, in order to actually achieve some of the federal government's key objectives.
And
Great.
I'll just add a little
okay,
bit.
so next question. You bet.
No, the silence was deafening is all, Andrea. I'll just add a quick bit that we really appreciate Ducks Unlimited's initiative in that letter. And what COVID has done is brought everybody to the table, and all saying more or less the same thing about the importance of agriculture. Mm-hmm. And we just have to keep that going.
Yes.
Great, thanks, Bob. Here's a question regarding processing. So our industry is quite vulnerable due to the number of processors that we have. How do we manage the risk of a major processor shutting down like we've seen? And can we actually manage that risk? Sort of, Russ might want to take that one.
Well, I think that COVID-19 was a particularly nefarious opponent here, that it worked its way into a couple of major processors. I mean, we do have a fairly concentrated industry. We're probably on the other side of the spectrum. We're relatively small. We're local. We're maybe seen by some as part of the solution. Having said that, our smallness here in this region doesn't make us any less important to our region where we are. So if our plant, gets affected by COVID-19 at some point, it will affect the ability for local producers to ship cattle into our market, local dairy and beef producers to ship cattle into our plant. So that will cause us major grief down here. So, I don't know, short of getting into some of the routines which we've seen now, which are probably going to be here to stay for an indefinite period of time until a vaccine is created. I think we're just going to have to be extra diligent in educating our employees in all the various techniques that we need to wash hands. We're going to have to monitor temperatures. We're going to do all those things for some longer period of time than probably any of us would have imagined. So I don't know how you really mitigate it. You do the best you can, but it's like cold, flu, COVID-19. These are just things that circulate in the community, and it's very difficult to keep everybody completely safe from it. So I don't know really what the answer is. I'd like to believe that a plant our size is a part of the solution for our local region, but it's hard to say with global scale and the necessity for that in the larger regions. It's hard to say whether additional smaller plants would be part of the solution in those areas where more cattle are. I don't know.
Thanks, Russ. How are we doing, Andrea? Should we kind of wrap it up? And are you able to follow up? Have you got more questions that you'd like to follow up with later on directly? I think Andrea's on a little bit of a delay here.
Yeah, we have a few that couldn't quite get answered, so maybe we will take those and answer them. So you can go ahead and wrap up, Anne.
Okay, can you flip over to the upcoming events slide, and I will get us wrapped up. And I do want to first of all thank our 4 presenters today. Some interesting angles to be looking at current and post-COVID. We heard the word opportunity, silver lining a lot. So thanks all 4 of you very much for taking the time to be with us today. And to all of you that are signed in listening. We had a great attendance today, so we're excited about that, and that tells us to keep doing more of these. And so with that, on the screen in front of you, we've got some upcoming events between now and the end of June. Next week, we'll have another webinar on understanding 2020 food trends. So certainly go to the website at crsb.ca under the About Us piece, and then you go down to events, and that's where you can register for any of those, but certainly join us next week on the 26th. And we'll maybe just flip it over to one last slide. I heard Russ talk about this in terms of our journey, and that's certainly what we focus at the CRSB every day. We're not trying to get this done overnight. There's steps, there's pieces, and it is a journey. And I liked what you said about the trip being the funnest part. And so we've all been involved. Of course, you can see that timeline there in front of you. We started in 2014 at the CRSB, and we've had some great movement forward along with our diverse membership, which has been acknowledged several times by our panelists today and the stakeholders that we're working with. We've had some major milestones, as you can see on that slide, but we certainly hope to continue to have that progress, and that's how we look at sustainability moving forward. So with that, again, thank you so much. We'd love to see you back here next week. Stay healthy, stay safe. See you soon. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Ann.
Have a great week.
Stay safe.